Welcome, welcome, welcome. So we're looking at the last of our series around change, and this one is around sustaining change. As we were putting this together, we thought, what better way to finish the whole program than doing something around sustaining change? Because we've talked about how to deal with resistance, we've talked about how to, prepare for change, readiness, those kinds of factors, and now it becomes a case of let's keep that going so that we don't lose that traction. Now, sustaining change, there's really two aspects to it. The first of which is around building that change, building that sustainment during the larger change. So we've got those small wins along the way, and how do we leverage those and keep things going? And then, of course, there's the larger conversation around how do I keep the new behaviors, the new systems, the new things in place when we get to that stage of having fully completed everything within the change. Okay, so with a little bit of logistics as we get started, as usual. Your host today, myself, David Donaldson, and as always, supporting us, Scott, with the technology and sound issues. If you do have any technical issues, please raise your hand, pop into the chat box. If you're really having a big struggle with it, then you can fire an email to Scott, just info@TidalShift.ca will get us there. And as always, we are recording these sessions, so if there is an issue, you can always catch it on the rewind. At the top, you do have a raise your hand icon. A couple of you have seen have already been using that, so thank you so much. There's the chat box, which will be open throughout the session, so if you have any ideas, any thoughts, if you'd like to contribute to the conversation, please pop in there. As always, we do this very interactively, and we will be having opportunities for we'll have opportunities for polls and questions and things like that. So we've got a very interactive session today. And I see Reg has already popped in with a note. As always, I'm standing by to be the gopher to look things up. Thank you, Reg. Reg has become my unofficial assistant now. All right. And of course, we always accept applause along the way. Okay. My opening thought today from Andy Warhol. They say that time changes things, but you actually have to change them yourselves. And really, this is, I think, very quintessential to what we're going to be talking about today when we talk in terms of sustainment. Yes, change takes time, and different people take different amounts of time, and over time, things do end up changing. But the reality is, it is us that is changing, is within ourselves. And that's going to be an important focus for our conversation today, because when we don't have change within our people, within the targets of the change, we really don't effectively have that change. So, it's going to be a big part of our focus today and what we're going to take a look at. So, our first poll for today: have you experienced or managed a project or a change that was not sustained? So think about that scenario where you've implemented the new thing. Okay, whether that's a piece of software, maybe it's a new process, maybe it's a piece of technology like a machine, whatever that looks like, and the change was not sustained. So the piece of technology was shelved, was put on, was not used, that kind of thing. So we're really kind of looking for, how do you experience a failed change? And we're getting fast and furious. We've got almost 2/3 of the folks voted so far. It's going to give it another moment or two. All right. Let's close the poll there and let's show the results. Oh, what am I doing here? Back to poll. Broadcast results. There we are. That's what I wanted to do. All right. So we see 85% of people saying yes, they have experienced that. I'm one of those 85% as well. I have experienced changes that were not sustained. So the system was rolled out, the thing was put in place, and hence it never kind of went anywhere. That's a pretty amazing statistic when you think about it, and it's entirely not surprising. We all have some of those failures in our experience, of course. 3 very lucky folks who have not experienced that. So. Boy, I'm looking forward to hearing from you guys in the next couple slides. So we're going to step right into our second poll, which is: have you experienced a change where it was sustained? So this is the same question, opposite end. So the first one was not sustained. You said, yes, it was not sustained. Have you experienced one where it was sustained? So the change took hold. You went forward. You know, we've now got the new system, the new thing, the new culture, the new behaviors, whatever that looks like. Again, give people a few moments to vote. Getting close to our numbers from before. So I'm going to end the poll here. Thank you so much for your input. Broadcast our results, and again, not surprising, 94% are saying, yep, had successful projects. Absolutely. We've got a very good group that tends to come to these sessions each week, and really appreciate you guys sharing your experiences there. We have one who hasn't had that success yet, and I'm hoping that you're very new to this, and you've got lots of place to go, and haven't had a huge long time of ones that were not sustained. So it's interesting when you ask those two questions, because I was expecting a pretty solid yes on both of those, which is really what we got. Have you had a project where it wasn't sustained? Yes, we have. Have we had ones where it was? Yes, we have. So, we've got this real mixed bag of some projects fail, some don't, right? Some are sustained. And when I say fail, I'm talking about post-implementation. When we think about, project success, it's very often judged on factors like on time and on budget. Did we get the sign off at the end, which is very, very important, absolutely. But if we look at it from a change perspective, it's really more about, did we have that measurable change in behavior down the road? So, 3 months, 6 months, a year later, do we have, a new way of being? Are we using the new system? Is it changing how we're working? These kind of factors. So we've had 2 yeses on opposite questions. What I'd like to do now is explore a little bit around why not sustained and why was it sustained. So apologies for the grammar here. In the left box, I'd like you to pop in some of your comments around an experience you had where the change was not sustained. And just type in some of the factors that dialed into that. On the right-hand box, I want you to type in some of the factors, in your opinion, where it was sustained and why it was sustained. We'll give you guys a few minutes, because I'm actually asking for two answers here, so we'll give it a few extra minutes. And it's interesting that we're getting way more nots than whys it was. That could just be because I directed you there first. But it's interesting because our mind tends to process the failure differently than the successes. We tend to remember them a little more vividly. So it's often easier to recall the war stories of, oh my goodness, this didn't work, versus the hey, it did. Anyways, let's start with the not sustained. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to scroll to the top here. Let's take a look at what some of these are. Not enough communication / training / information provided to the end users from Amy. Absolutely. It's interesting when we talk in terms of change management. The first thing that comes to mind for most people is communication. And while that's a very important tool, and you could not do your job without it, it does go beyond that. So I'm very happy, Amy, that you went beyond just communication. You got into training and information. But key here is provided to the end users so that those folks know what the heck's going on. What we tend to do as humans, when we don't have all the information, we fill in the blanks. And when we fill in the blanks, we default to the negative, and we assume, and this kind of thing. Rodney really, building on that lack of team communication. So in Amy's one, she's talking about, communication to the end users, the folks who are receiving this. And Rodney's talking about within the team, right? So now we get into that coordination of the team. And one of the most successful projects I had the great privilege of experiencing and being on the part of the team, we had regular team meetings every single day. I mean, it wasn't agile. I mean, they were effectively doing agile, but we had a quick stand up right at the beginning of the day, quick touch base. There was a chalkboard. It was actually a chalkboard up on the wall with notes on it and what's happening, and just keep everyone in the loop. It was very open, very open communication. From Liliana, management changed directions and did not buy in. So Liliana, I'm guessing you when the did not buy in piece, are you talking about management did not buy in? So what I'm reading from you on this is a scenario where you were headed down a path, management changed direction, and they weren't bought into the original, and so hence. So if you wouldn't mind just popping in, and I'll look for that comment, if you could just do a quick clarification on that. Angela, unclear requirements, and thank you for using the word requirements, Angela. It's not about scope, it's about requirements. It's about what do we need, right? And we've talked about this in other webinars, where we talk about the whole concept of the why versus the what. Right? The why versus the what. And the why is the requirement, the what is the thing, the product. And my simple quick example of that is I ask people, client comes to you and says, I need a minivan. Well, the minivan's not a need. It's a what, it's a product, it's a thing. Right? So what's the what, what's the requirement behind that? It's transportation, right? Which leads directly into the testing piece, because I'm gonna test to my requirements, not to my scope. Right? And then finally, the poor stakeholder engagement. Well, there's why we didn't have the good requirements in the beginning, right? Because we didn't engage our stakeholders. Absolutely. Okay, so I see Liliana's popped in. Yes, initial management team was involved, but new manager had a different vision. Excellent, thank you. Yes. So now we get into a deeper question with Liliana's scenario around, did the organization properly change direction, or did they attempt to continue down? Did they continue down that original path? Right. Okay. From Beth, process was later modified. Absolutely. Yeah. So we get that kind of half done, partway through thing. Poor ownership after the change from Derek. Love it. Yeah. We need to have ownership not only to create the thing, but also to keep it going and sustain it. We do this great little exercise in one of our change courses, and we call it the change challenge. And we get you to, very quick and fast paced, and you change a bunch of things. And then as soon as you start to do the debrief on it, people are changing back. Right? Even though we never said to do that. From Steve, requirements were not well done. Again, building on what was said earlier. Reg, upper management was not committed to the requirements for thorough requirements, move through uptake, listen to naysayers, backed away from the change. Okay, so management lost their resolve, right? Backed away a little bit, absolutely. So we lost that support. From Christine, took so long to implement the business/need technology change. Love it. And that brings up a really good point, Christine, because in today's world, we are so fast-paced. And when we talk about fast-paced, humans have always, the world is always constantly changing, right? But the pace of change is just increasing and increasing and increasing. The cell phone, as it stands now, the smartphone with the touchscreen, that's only about 11 years old right now. And I think about that, and I'm now a good 25 years into my career as teaching, been probably about 40 years, working, and only 1/4 of that we've had, what we call a cell phone today. And it's kind of hard to remember how it was before, right? So we got this, high pace of change, and this is where we need to stay aware and make sure that whatever we're building, supporting, creating, it's actually going to meet the needs when we're done, right? From Jeffrey, holds traditional mindset beliefs, absolutely. So people not letting go, and that's actually a little bit of dramatic foreshadowing there, Jeffrey, because we're going to be talking about some different models, and one of the concepts and Bridges model of letting go first. And if we don't get past that stage first, we're not going to get to the sustainment stage. I chimed in with no return on investment, and this really builds on what Christine was talking about, where the need changed. So I don't have a return on that investment. Why would I continue forward? It's not giving me any benefits here, right? End users, people impacted by the change, not involved enough, not engaged enough. Absolutely. And we've had lots of conversations around that. From Navpreet, again, the unclear requirements from Dan. Tool being integrated with had low adoption rate. Yeah, and that's exactly where we're going today. Absolutely. It's all about adoption. It's about people picking it up. So we get too focused on the product, on the project, and we lose focus on the people. And that's where the change really occurs. And that's why I chose my opening quote. From Yanira, lack of buy-in to promote the use, also not addressing requirements from users. Love that. And this is an interesting one because I was listening to CBC Radio just a little while back, and there's a show I really enjoy called Under the Influence. It's all about advertising. And one of the examples he used was the shopping cart. Now, go to any store, grocery store, Shoppers Drug Mart, many clothing stores have this as well, and you'll see people pushing a cart through the store and loading all their stuff up into it. Well, the inventor of the shopping cart, when they first invented it and implemented it, it was a failure. No one used it. And there were some social reasons around that. So lack of buy-in to promote use. So what they did is they hired actors to go and push these carts around the store to show people that it's okay. And when people saw that, then they started mimicking those behaviors. And I actually talk about this in an article that I just did, which was out in our newsletter, which I think was released yesterday. So if you're interested in that, fire me a note, fire Scott a note, and we'll get you on the mailing list. Finally, Costa leadership lost their support for the change. Absolutely. We saw that in a couple of others. Let's go to some of the successes. And I chimed in here. Great support from senior management. One of my biggest success stories, I actually had a call directly from the CFO. And, having that level of support was phenomenal. Huge difference. Senior management support from Ian, same story, absolutely. Information was provided early and often. Thank you for that, Amy. Early and often, and that's the key. Because if I need to provide it early enough so that people have time to go through that change and process it. But we also need to keep it going because it falls from top of list. I was chatting with someone from the public sector, one of the cities, and she commented how when they came back after a year of working really hard on this and talked to one of their stakeholders, the comment from the stakeholder was, "Oh, I thought that had died. Hadn't heard anything." Right? And what had happened was they had done their initial consultations, they'd done their initial announcement and marketing of the change, and then they went off and got down into the weeds doing their thing, and people hadn't heard for 6 months or so, and they kind of assumed that it had just quietly gone away. Great ongoing communications and resources from Rodney, absolutely, and the key words here is ongoing, right? Angela, stakeholders very engaged from beginning to end, and then she puts in brackets there using Agile. By its sheer design, Agile has a lot of that built in. And this is kind of part of the reason for Agile's high success rates because it's got some change management elements inherently built in that we sometimes forget about. Continuous communication, value proposition, absolutely. Team support, strong sponsorship. So we're seeing several people commenting about the management support at various levels. Openness to embrace the change and new perspective. From Jeffrey, a huge cultural component there for sure. It's and that's something that we need to think about as we're heading into managing these changes. What's the landscape look like? Am I fighting the uphill battle or do I have some very eager folks? Good change management. Thank you, Beth. Including the top-down, bottom-up buy-in, so from all sides. Christine, early focus on change management. Thank you for that because this is a key. When we look at timelines, when we look at the life cycle, change management starts before the project starts and ends after. So we've got that early involvement happening, getting the foundations laid, getting the environment prepared for it, that kind of stuff. From Reg, clear, ongoing, repetitive communication. Thank you for the repetitive piece. 7 to 14 times is kind of the rule of thumb you can use around how many times you need to communicate. Open discussions, highlight that word, open discussions on the why and the how, clear statements on how the work and the world would be better. So, just being really very clear. But we need to make sure that it's clear to the stakeholders we're talking to. It can be very clear to senior management, but is it clear to my frontline staff and vice versa? Where's that kind of value prop? From Diane, change made sense. People saw the value. Oh, thank you so much. We have this discussion around change fatigue so often. Change fatigue is really driven by doing things that don't make sense. When we're doing things that make sense, it's amazing the depth of energy people have. But when you're doing something that doesn't make sense, it is just it's an energy vampire. I was chatting with one of my associates yesterday, and we were talking about this whole energy thing in changes, and he used the expression energy vampire. So Kirk, I'm gonna give a shout out to you for that one. And I love that expression because it just sucks the energy out of you. You know, when it makes sense. Okay, yeah, I'm in. Let's do this, right? Costa, able to prove, show what's in it for me. The WIFM piece, love it, and that really builds on what Diane was saying. Yanira, change management process applied, good communication, absolutely. And then finally from Stephanie, focus on ensuring success after the project closes. Thank you, thank you, thank you. The goal is not to just deliver the project, but to ensure that people embrace it and take ownership. And I think that's a perfect place for us to finish this little conversation, because really that is what it is about. It's about how do we get folks to embrace the change. Now, we've had this conversation in some of our previous webinars. We've talked in detail about some of these models. You know, just to give a quick high-level overview, we've got a number of different models like the Kubler-Ross change curve, the Bridges model, Cotter, ADKAR. And you take a look at these, and they all have a piece in them around the continuation piece, whether that's commitment or sustaining the change, or as Bridges put it, it's the new beginnings, because that's where people are starting to embrace it. And within ADKAR, the reinforcement. Now, it was easy to find graphics for those four. Finding a graphic for Senge was much harder, because Senge is all about this organic model. Think like a biologist. And this is where we start to blend systems thinking. We get into learning organizations and these kinds of things. And what Senge is really about is creating an environment that's going to allow the change to flourish. So let's just think on this for a few moments. Imagine a garden. You're gonna take up gardening. You know, you got a patch of land out here, and you want to grow some maybe some nice flowers for decorative, or maybe it's fruits and vegetables, or whichever. So what do? Well, we create the environment. We figure out what types of plants would work best based on sun and shade, based on the soil type. If the soil type's wrong, we change the soil. Right? We mix in some things, right? Whether that's in the terms of fertilizer, or maybe mixing in some sand to break up that stiff clay that we've got, create some drainage. What we're doing is we're creating the proper environment that's going to allow the plant to grow. And that's what Senge is all about. It's about creating the environment to allow the change to occur and to support that change. Now, depending upon what we do, we're going to either enable and support, or reduce and prevent, as it were. So while Senge's model is less prescriptive from here are the stages and steps, I mean, ADKAR is the most of these that's, here are the actual steps. It's a methodology. Cotter is kind of halfway in between, because he doesn't actually prescribe how to do those steps, similar with Bridges and Kubler-Ross. But with Senge, you can layer all four of those on top of the Senge stuff. So we're going to be looking in a little more detail around some of the Senge concepts. And the first one that I want to dig into today is the concept of levers. Now, Archimedes famously said, or is quoted, give me a lever big enough and I can move the world. And what a lever does for us is it enables us to focus our strength, so that we're now having a small effort on the end of the lever while creating a big response. And there's three of them that he identified when we talk in terms of organizational levers: emotional, procedural, and structural. And what I'd like to do is take a few moments to just dig into each one of these a little bit. For the emotional levers, this is all about internal pressure. Emotional is, this is within ourselves. So this is things like guilt and shame on the negative side, pride and accomplishment on the positive side, and that whole feeling of involvement. So when we start doing things like good, effective stakeholder engagement, what we're actually doing is applying an emotional lever. I saw this implemented really, really well in one organization. We were transitioning from dumb terminals to PCs. and people were getting a color screen for the first time. They're getting a mouse for the first time. This is back in the DOS Windows days. And so, I mean, we're talking really on the early stages of, you know, the whole graphical user interface piece. And one of the things that they did, which was really smart, is they put a little there was a little piece of plastic, a little box on top of the monitors, and on it had four squares, and each square was a space for you to put a sticker. And each time you attended a class, you got another sticker. So the first one was there when you got your PC because you attended the Windows intro class, right? So when you got your new PC, you had to attend your Windows intro class, and there goes the sticker. And then the next sticker, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, etc. What happened though was they positioned this as a badge of accomplishment. So people were eager to get them. There was lineups. People were vying for a position to get into these training classes so they could get the next sticker. And we do this all the time. We get certifications, we get letters, we proudly display them after our names. We often wear the lapel pin, and this is really an emotional lever, right? So we can use these at times to help drive change. Now we also need to think about how that's going to impact folks when potentially there may be a bit of a negative on that. Perhaps their department's being disbanded, or they're maybe having to take a step down the corporate ladder a little bit because they're no longer at the higher level position, and in the new regime they're down a little bit lower and so forth. And this is one of the big challenges that we face when we get into a merger acquisition change, because people's turf is threatened, their position. If I'm senior man on the totem pole and we merge with the other organization, is there someone who's going to be more senior to me now? Am I going to be kind of sliding back a little bit and having to take second string as opposed to being first string, and things like that. And of course, it can work in both directions. Procedural levers. Now, this is how we get the job done. So this is things like methodologies and templates and regulations. And we think about some of those, and when we implement those new changes, which pieces do we have in place that's going to make it easier? So, thinking about some of the changes that I've experienced over the years, and when we have a really good, well thought out methodology with good supporting templates, and potentially even good supporting systems, right? That's when we've now got a procedural lever, right? So we've got the new way of doing things. It actually works easier, and it's got better support than the old way. The old way was very kludgy, and we just sort of figured it out as we went. The new way, however, has more prescriptive methodology or process, and it has the supports for that. So then it becomes easier to do things under the new way than the old way. So now we have a positive procedural lever. And again, this can go in both directions, because if the new system doesn't work very well, if it's buggy, for example, that can be a negative lever for the change. And I actually experienced both of those in the same change. And here's what happened. We'd hired an intern. It was a small company, and we'd hired an intern to write some code for us. And the code that he wrote was to create proposals for clients. So we're a sales organization. We're chugging out proposal after proposal after proposal. And, you do it all up in the nice paper and bind it and present it to the client, all that kind of stuff. And it was all done in WordPerfect at the time. And we had some stuff around that, like we had some macros and things, and we'd sort of semi-automated stuff, but it was very manual. It was very much a pull up the old file and make some edits and hit send, and of course there was the occasional mistake. So we had this guy, and what he did was he wrote this really cool piece of software, and you would go in and you would enter in the client's name and their address, and then you would enter in 5 of these and 3 of those and so forth. And what it would do is it would go to the database, and it would pull up the information, all the descriptions, the pricing. It would do the extended, so you have 5 of those, and it would 5 times whatever, and all that kind of fun stuff. And then it would just create the whole thing, and you'd hit print, and it was fantastic. It cut our time probably in half in getting this job done. So there we had a really good positive procedural lever. The new system was better than the old system. However, it was buggy. It was really buggy. At probably about 1 in 3, it would actually hang. And when it hung, it would hang the entire computer. This was I need to reboot and restart situation. And I was doing I was under a real time crunch one day, and I had a quote to get out. I had a short amount of time to do it, and I paused for a second before I started, and I thought, if I use the old system, which was very stable, it never hung. If I use the old system, I get it done in time. It'd be tight, but I get it done in time. If I use the new system, I get it done faster. If it hung while I was in the middle of doing this, I was done. I was not going to be able to recover and get it done in time. And I knew that from my experience. So I opted the safer route and I used the old method. Well, my boss comes walking by. He was the owner of the company. He'd actually been the one who spearheaded the whole new system and hired the intern. And he looked at me and says, "Why aren't you using the new system?" And I explained to him why. And I said, want to make sure that we hit this deadline, which we're going to. But if I use the new system, and if it hangs, it's not going to happen. And he was like, okay, thanks. And he went off and he tasked the intern to, address that, which he did. And we now ended up with a better system because it was now not only procedurally better, but it was also now stable, right? So we addressed those issues and made some improvements, and it worked brilliantly from there on. So there we had a procedural lever that was not only helping drive the change, but at the same time was resisting the change. So we addressed the resistance, and we had this brilliant new system. It was fantastic. The final one is structural levers. And the structural levers tend to be around things like hierarchy and team structure and job descriptions and things like that. So we think about, the changes that we want. Do we want people to behave in a new way? Do we want people to, function in a different way? So what organizational pieces do we have in place that's either going to support or inhibit that? Classically, many organizations today are saying we need to be more innovative. But then they include a very hierarchical structure of chain of command and decision making, where anyone on the front line who has a new idea that would like to implement needs to talk to 5 layers up and this kind of stuff and get approvals. Okay, let's think about that for a sec. I've got this great idea. I'm a frontline staffer, and I got bureaucracy to have that idea go up the food chain and likely come back down with a no. So what in the hierarchy do we have there? Do we have some autonomy? Do we have some ability for folks to make those decisions? The example that's popping to mind for me is Home Depot. And Home Depot is famous for its customer service. This is what the founders really were working towards. And one of the ways that they did that is they created a hierarchy and a team structure and a job description that supported the frontline staffer to support the client. Now, you think about a typical retail experience from the customer's perspective. They walk into the store, they walk around, they find what they want, often without assistance from anyone. They put it in their shopping cart. There's our shopping cart again. They put it in the shopping cart, they go to the checkout, and here is really the only touch point to the organization where you have an opportunity to correct something, the cashing, right, when you cash out. And we're very used to this now, where the cash will always ask you, did you find everything you need today? This kind of thing. So with the Home Depot, what they said was, when there's an issue, maybe it's a price discrepancy, maybe it's a return, whatever, to have to go up through a hierarchical chain and call the manager and they come down and all this impedes that customer service experience. So they gave their associates, especially the ones working the cash, discretion to make the decision, service the customer. And there's some really famous stories out of this. And the first one was someone returned. So part of that is that they'll accept any returns, regardless of if you have a receipt or not. Someone actually returned a set of snow tires to Home Depot. Home Depot doesn't sell snow tires, but their policy is you accept them and you take the return. So they did. The other one that I really love is it was actually a contractor. It's a very busy day. There was a big lineup. The contractor showed up and he had a $100 bill and he was buying like a $5 light switch or something small. And the cash didn't have enough change in her till to provide change. So, looking at that, the procedure was to send a note through the vacuum tube up into the back office, and then the back office would, put together some cash and send it back down. And it takes time, and the contractor was obviously in a hurry. There's a big lineup, and the cashier looked at it, looked at the price, reached into her purse, paid for it, handed back the receipt with the $100 bill and the product, and said, "Thank you for shopping at Home Depot." And the guy was kind of a little shocked. So he thanked her and went on his way. The next day, he brought back his boss, who was the owner of the contracting company, to introduce him to the cashier because he was so impressed. And they said at that point, that contractor said, "We're going to commit to buying 100% of our stuff here at Home Depot. You've just got a customer for life." It's these kind of things. When you want that behavior, we need to put the structures in place to support it, right? So we think about the procedural structures, we think about the organizational structures, but we also think about the emotional, because think about how empowered and how important that associate feels, right? When that contractor came back the next day, he gave her a $20 tip and said, I wanted to thank you. I was in a great hurry. You really helped me out. Now they're not allowed to accept tips, so they put it into the pizza fund that they do, and share it with the rest of the team. But it's interesting when you put these in place, then you start to get those behaviors, and really that's what it's about when we're talking in terms of change. It's about behaviors. Now, one of the challenges with the whole concept of change management is there's a ton of different models, and we need to have them because we have very different people in very different situations and different personalities and all kinds of things. So we can actually layer these. And we've just had a quick look at levers. But I want to now take a look at the change formula. And this is the Beckhardt and Harris change formula. And basically what it's saying is, here are my three main elements when it comes to change. I'm just going to change my color here because that was just kind of a little lackluster. There we go. Here are my three main elements to change. The first of which is dissatisfaction with the status quo. How dissatisfied is my population with how we are today? If we're looking at the current situation and saying, you know what, it's okay, we're good. You're not going to really have a lot of support for that change. If they're looking at the current situation saying, this really, is not good, and I want to see something different, great. We're already one step ahead. The next one is the desirability of the proposed change. Okay, current state, not good. Future state, worse. Right, so we've got to kind of have those two in balance. And then finally, the practicality of the change. Yes, I would love to get out of the current situation. It's not happening. Love the new state. Totally get that. I'm really not sure how to transition, right? So what we're really looking at here is the interplay of the current state, the future state, and the transition between the two. So, we start off with our current state. How good is it? And how much I need to change that current state is really a big factor when it comes to how much I'm willing to embrace that change. What does the future state look like? Is it better or is it worse, right? If that new future state looks really good, okay, yeah, I want to go there. But let's not forget, and I think this is one that's often forgotten, is the practicality of the change. Now, I think it's pretty safe to say that all the folks who are on this webinar today are running pretty hard and fast. In today's world, we tend to be, very fast-paced and very, very, resource constrained. And I often wonder too, as we're sitting here in the middle of August, summer versus winter. A lot of organizations sort of quieten down over the summer a bit. I know we definitely do. People get more busy in the winter time. We had these peaks and valleys within our workflow. So how practical is it to layer on top of what you're doing now the additional work, effort, and energy that it takes to change or to transition? When I was on the convergence team, we were taking a couple areas in the bank and converging them together because what we were experiencing was some audit fatigue. People were being audited over and over and over again, So we got into the branches and the various lines of business. And what we realized was there was actually 4 different departments that were doing this. So we thought, why don't we start sharing results so we can conduct one audit and then we can take that one results, distribute it across the 4 departments, and then they can draw their own conclusions and do their own analysis, etc. So we can reduce the amount of audit fatigue. As we went through this and started to build the systems and put these other pieces in place, we had a lot of the factors in place, but the practicality of the change, at one point, we sort of butted up against that a little bit. And we were approaching year end. It was a month and a half out from year end. And if you have any familiarity with audit, especially in the financial world, come year end, you cannot talk to these folks. They're working pretty much as close to 24/7 as you physically can. They're doing evenings, they're doing weekends. Year end is just an overload nightmare for these folks. Now, the good side is that, month after year end, they get a break and, sort of get to recover. But the practicality of doing any kind of extra work on top during that period of time is just zero. And the project manager who was leading this, he was an IT guy, really good guy, and he did a very good job, but he didn't know the business very well. And he tried to bring in a beta test of the new system in that 6-week period just before year end. It's just like, yeah, people weren't even returning his phone call, right? So when we look at that, it's like, how practical is it to change? And notice some of the messages that were talked about when I asked you what was the or some of the factors that really enabled the change. And resoundingly coming back was support, right? So if it's practical, if I get support from higher level management that say, you know what, we're going to hire contractors to help you with the workload. We're going to, provide systems. We're going to provide extra time. We're going to, give you a temporary pass on, meeting your quotas, whatever that looks like. So we need these factors in place, and these are all individually levers, and they multiply together. Now, the last piece is the perceived cost of the change. And when we talk in terms of the cost of the change, while I may really like the future state, really want to get out of the current state, I can see how it works, and practically I can do all that. But if there's a cost, and again it's perceived cost to this change, what does that look like? If the cost is too great, I'm not making the transition, right? I would love to commute to work by helicopter. Current state, traffic in Toronto is just a nightmare. Avoid it wherever I can. Desirability of the proposed change, love to have a personal helicopter to fly there. Practicality, yeah, I can see the practicalness there. I live out in the country, we've got some property, we could, set up a landing pad. That totally all works. But the cost, yeah, it's not happening, unfortunately. Although I think I might need to check my lottery ticket. Okay, so when all of these pieces are in place and they're in balance with that, the perceived cost, that's when we start to see those changes happening. So we got the dissatisfaction, we got the desirability, we got the practicality. These are all levers, folks, that are going to help us drive that change. Okay, let's pop into our second question here, which is, have you ever experienced a lever? So have you experienced one? If so, what did that look like? Did it work? Was it positive? Was it negative? I'm getting a few yeses. I was hoping for a little description, but that's okay. So let me just share with you one that I had experienced. I joined a team, and initially the team was set up of about 6 people and then about 30 representatives from various areas of the organization. And the person who was heading up the team, his first order of business was to get everyone answering to him. And initially I thought, okay, yeah, no big deal. It doesn't really matter. I thought maybe this might be a bit of, hubris, that this person wanted, direct reports, things like that. But I was on this team for about 2 years, and this was a bigger long term, and to call it a project is really understating it. And I realized afterwards the brilliance of this, because what happened is we started out as basically 6 warring factions. Each one had their own WIIFM. At the end of our meetings, they all went back to their area, and by the end of it, it was very much a cohesive team. So they created a structure to promote that cross-fertilization across the team, to promote the team working together as an actual true team. And, it was a huge investment, but I tell you what, it really paid off. So Yanira, who's experienced some structural and some emotional on those, fantastic. And I've got multiple attendees typing right now, so we're going to give it a few moments while we let folks chime in here. Okay, so from Stephanie, restructure the way the team was working, develop a framework as a group. So the framework belonged to the team, the people felt empowered. So there we see combination of the structural and emotional, similar to Yanira's comment. They restructured the team. There was the empowerment piece. There was the framework belonged to us. There's that sense of ownership. So the emotional piece kicking in. Love that example. Thank you. From Reg, whoa, I combined your name in the first word. From Reg, yes, when the change required letting go of traditional structure of the 100+ years. Oh, so Reg, you're really wrestling with some of that legacy stuff. We get very ingrained into our thing, and we want to honor that, right? Because it got us this far, and if you've got an organization that's been around for more than 100 years, I'd say they're doing something right. But they needed to move away from that more traditional structure, the more nimble, responsive structure. The lever was emotional. The organization would be best at what it did, outpacing similar organizations that clung to the traditional. Oh, beautiful. So tying into that whole competition piece and that whole, we can outpace our competition. Love it. From Jeff, redesign, introduce new processes to improve engagement, more structural. Absolutely. So very, very much a structural piece. So introducing those processes. Now, we've got to be cautious that we don't rely on only one of them, right? Because if I just do the process piece and then I start becoming very prescriptive and almost policing the new process, we can actually develop a bit of a negative emotional lever, and that we may get into some resentment. But you're absolutely right. We need that structure there, because as I am attempting to, and I'm just going to back up to our formula for a moment, this is where the practicality of the change starts to come in, right? If I have a really good process that's going to help me move forward, those kinds of things. From Christine, we had a huge program, long-term initiative, love it. A number of projects within the dynamics of the core team developed, and we understood there were barriers to delivery involved. Largely growing more cohesive and daily contributor as well. We became aware of the implications that arose from other project streams, help lever what was already being developed and working in parallel. Fantastic. So, reaching out or being aware of that larger environment that you situate within. And this is part of the reason why I wanted to focus in on Sengei's work when we're talking in terms of sustainment. Because it's really about creating that environment that supports the change more organically. And part of what came out of Sengei's work is the whole concept of systems thinking and layering that into a learning organization. We're going to be doing more sessions on that in the future. But what it is about being aware of the larger picture. What are the other things going on? Does it make sense for us to move forward? Can we leverage some of that? And that may be in the form of I can shorten what I'm doing because someone else is already doing that, or leveraging on that success. Or it may be in the form of backing off because there's other things that are going on that need time and stability before we can kind of move into those sorts of things. So some great examples here. From Rodney, emotional. Too attached to resources that others need. Resources became personalized forgetting resources belong to the organization. Ooh, that's a good one, Rodney. Thank you. Yeah, when people get very, they get into that turf war, it becomes kind of their fiefdom. And yeah, I've seen that happen a few times where resources, the ownership has almost gone too far. So great example. Thank you so much. Okay. Let's get reset here. There we go. Now, one of the other things that all of this does is it gets to a concept of critical mass. And I wanted to bring the conversation of critical mass into our conversation of levers because, of course, once we hit critical mass, what happens is it starts to kind of take on a life of its own, and it kind of drives itself going forward. And as we look at the adoption rate going up over time, we move from mobilization through implementation, which is really more the product side, to solidification, which is now becomes part of the norm, becomes part of my culture and how we operate as an organization. This was very much popularized in the book Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. Fantastic book, highly recommend it. And the idea here is when we reach that critical mass, right? What's basically happening is the behavior becomes contagious. Now, let's be clear though that behavior could be good or bad, right? So we want to be very aware of what direction that's happening. But I love the second point from Meyer. The people and systems, we need to have both working together. People and systems operating with unstoppable momentum, right? So we look at this piece here, this unstoppable momentum, and we consider if we were to graph the adoption rate versus the amount of effort that we put in. And what's going to happen is we get to this tipping point where our adoption rate is now outpacing, and we don't need the effort anymore. So when we get this right, as a change manager, what you're going to be doing is you're actually going to be stepping back. You're going to be getting out of the way, because much like a train with all that momentum and all that weight, it takes a lot of effort to get it rolling. But once it gets rolling and it starts chugging down the tracks, get out of the way, right? And let's get it going. Step back. Now, yes, we want to monitor and control. We want to make sure that we are heading in the right direction and that it continues to go positively. But if we can build up that momentum, if we can kind of get things going, that's when we're going to get that true sustainment, because it's going to basically take a life of its own. Now, when we think about that sustainment, we have vicious and we have virtuous cycles. And a vicious cycle would look like this. The middle managers are complaining about the new system. So we've rolled out this new system. People are complaining about it. Okay, now key here though is the middle managers. Their team members look to them to decide. We're always going to look, kind of one or two levels up, right? Well, we're hearing the good message from up on high, the CEO, the CFO, the board of directors, that kind of thing. We're going to look a couple layers up and say, okay, we're hearing that. What do you guys think, right? Now, the team members believe they don't need to adopt the change. The team members, we now find workarounds. So here we're into some procedural levers, right? One of the common procedural levers that you see often, especially with IT work, is you take away the old system, so it can't be used, right? So we figure out a workaround, right? Maybe I'm going to do it manually in a spreadsheet or something like that. Then everyone gets used to the new system, because remember, it's been allowed to develop. And finally, and I love this ending here, what system? What are you talking about? Never happened. Okay. So let's take a look at the virtuous cycle. The sales team's nervous about the new laptop. So the new product being rolled out, sales team is nervous about it. A few customers bought them. Okay, this is, we have some success. The new customers liked it. Customers told their friends. Their friends bought new laptops. Sales went up. Okay. The sales team became more competent and confident in selling it, and the organization increased its market share. Now we think about that, and it's the successes building, and the key here is that what we've got a series of small successes that start to build on each other. This is why in Kotter's model, early on, it says build on those successes, and you find that in pretty much every model. It talks about generating the short-term wins and publicizing those and building on that success, right? Now, if we allow this negative spiral to progress, we need to stop it. We need to intervene at some level and get this stopped somehow, right? So now we get into concepts of, how do we deal with resistance and reactions and, all that kind of fun stuff. But if we don't do something about it, what it's going to do is it's going to develop and it's going to develop and it's going to develop. And now we're dealing with the big issue. And there's a great expression that I love, which is listen to the whispers, you don't have to hear the screams, which is deal with the things when they're small, when they're starting to develop that cycle. And if it's a good virtuous cycle, enhance it, fertilize it, give it some sun, give it some water, whatever that plant needs to grow. Let's help it grow, right? Let's give it the environment that will help it grow. Okay. Now, one last tool for you, because I see that we're running very close to our time limit. Force field analysis. If you're not familiar with this one, this is a fantastic one. You think about the change, you think about the forces that are supporting, the forces that are resisting, and I just realized I put the wrong word in here, the old copy-paste piece. That should be forces that resist or prevent. So what are the forces that support? I might have good support from high-level management, in this case the CFO. The new system is good. It's easier to use, right? So we got a procedural lever. Maybe the industry direction, the entire industry is moving in this direction, right? Or maybe there's a successful pilot that I can leverage. So these are all things that are going to help me support. I think about the ones that are going to resist. We talked a little bit about silos in the organization. Maybe the organizational culture, as in Reg's example there, we've got 100 years of legacy here. It's going to be a big one. Budgetary constraints, not having the resources, these kinds of things. Now, when you do a force field analysis, the way I like to do them is I draw the length of the arrow to represent kind of the size of the force. So silos is a relatively small one. Organizational culture is a big one, right? Support from the CFO, that's a big one. The successful pilot is a smaller one. But how do I enhance that? How do I turn that into a bigger arrow? How can I leverage that in some way? And similarly, how can I make the resisting forces, the preventing forces, smaller? And when I get the balance right, where I have smaller resisting forces and greater supporting forces, things tend to go forward easier. So we want to be aware of these and look at how we can leverage and enhance or drive those. Okay. Finish off with a quick wrap up. Levers, the environment that supports your change. Create the environment. You think about the garden, you want to have the right soil type, you want to have the right amount of sun, the right amount of moisture, all those kinds of factors. Cycles, they're going to develop. Are they virtuous? Are they vicious? If they're virtuous, leverage them, build on them, enhance them, advertise them. If they're vicious, figure out how you can redirect it to either become virtuous or shut it down. And then finally, force field analysis. What can you leverage? And what are those potential vicious cycles that I can get ahead of? Because if we can get into some of those things, we will basically be able to have something that's going to be more enticing, that you actually want to have that change yourself. So you're going to look forward to that change. You're going to want to be that change. So while it does take time, yes, time isn't what changes, it's people who change. And this is the big difference between change management and project management. So I think this is a good place to finish our series on. I am just going to do a quick shout out to the International Project Management Day coming up November 1st. We will be hosting a mini conference in the North York Memorial Community Hall. That register link is active, so I'll leave this here for a few moments if you want to click on that to register. If you don't get a chance to register today, you can always hit our website. Just scroll down to the bottom, we've got a link for that. Hoping you can make it out. We've got a number of great guest speakers coming. I'll be doing a session around PMOs. We've got some other ones around change management and project management and looking at agile and different tools and things. So it's a very, very holistic look at this whole world. And of course, the all-important PDU. So 1 minute over. Do apologize for that, folks. Been a good session today. I'm going to stay on the line for a little bit. If anyone has any questions, they can pop into the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to wish you a great rest of your summer. The weather today looks really nice, so hopefully you'll be able to get out and enjoy that weather a little bit. So thank you guys so much for taking the time today, and we'll see you next time. That